Hi, I'm Keith, and here we have a John Deere 35G. While this machine was not running, it got completely submerged in water, so we have to drain all the fluids, get the water out of the engine, get this thing fired up and running again. See, that's all water coming out still. If you look at it, you can see it's rusty. It definitely got water on it. That's water mixed in the fuel.
Welcome to Service Call, a mechanic's guide to service, troubleshooting, and repair. And on this episode,
Seat was soaking wet, didn't want it to get damaged or ruined or start growing mold or mushrooms. You can really see how far the hoses are in the cab. If there was glass there, it would have. That's a good sign. That's a really good sign. No water in there. Normally what you would see if we have any power on the dash, see if we have any power anywhere.
to easily and quickly book a mechanic, visit tecamohd.com.
So now that we got the fuel drained out and clean fuel in the machine, the next thing we need to do is get the water out of the cylinders of the engine. To do so, we got to tip the cab forwards to access the engine. But because this machine was shut off the way it was, and we can't fire it up to move the boom out of the way, I'm going to have to disconnect some of the hydraulic lines on the cylinders and get the other lines on them so that we can get it in a bucket. And then we'll manually move the boom, pivot it over so it's straight, and be able to tilt the cab forwards. So first cylinder we're going to do is the tilt cylinder here, the swing cylinder. There's two hoses in here. We want to undo the machine hoses from the cylinder. We're going to put these hoses on so we can put them in a bucket, and as we move the boom, oil will be coming out of these hoses. So that's a way that we can contain the oil. It's okay that air sucks in the other hose. When we fire this machine up, it'll purge all of the air out. So next step, let's put some hoses on this machine. Okay, so the hoses that we're putting on there, on this machine, it's a number 4 GIC, 1/4 inch GIC. I have caps and plugs that I use. I keep them on my truck. You can buy them at any hydraulic shop. So when I pull the hose off of there, I'm gonna put a plug into the hose so we don't lose hydraulic oil from the machine. And then I'm gonna put this hose onto the cylinder so that we can get it out into a bucket. We're gonna do that 2 times, one on each end of the cylinder. Because we're not starting the machine, you can just put the plug in hand tight. It's just to stop any oil from dripping out or any contaminants from getting in. Now I'm gonna feed my new hose up, and then we're gonna screw it on. And again, this one only has to be hand tight as well. It doesn't have to be fully tight because we're not gonna really have any pressure whatsoever. Now that that one's done, we're gonna go further in. We can get it from the outside here and underneath.
Help support this channel by subscribing below and hitting that bell icon. Thanks for all the support so far, especially on this service call series. We love hearing feedback from the community, and if there's anything you'd like to see, be sure to let us know in the comments.
Now that we have these 2 hoses connected to the cylinder, we can easily put them in a bucket and contain the oil that's going to come out of them. Now there is multiple ways that you can pivot this cylinder. In this case, we're using hoses and we're venting the cylinder to be able to move it. If you can get at the pressure relief valves, you can back the pressure relief valves off, but in this case, the valve bank with the pressure relief valves is underneath the cab. There's no way to access them until we lift the cab, and to lift the cab, I got to move the boom. So I'm gonna get my helper over here. He's just gonna hold the hoses, make sure they stay in the bucket. And now one hose oil is gonna come out of, and one hose air is gonna go in. So you don't wanna take your hose that the air is gonna go in, stuff it into the bottom of your bucket, otherwise it's sucking in oil. If you're using a dirty bucket, it's not very good. So we just kinda hold them up in the air like so, and we can aim the oil in, and it allows clean air to go in as well. So we should be able to move this by hand. I haven't tried yet, so here's the first attempt. See, and if you look in the bucket, you'll see oil coming out of the hose. Now that we're square with the machine, I'm hoping that the boom is down far enough that we can tilt the cab far enough up. If we can't tilt the cab far enough up, then I'm gonna have to fold the stick in a little bit, and we're gonna have to bring the boom down a little bit to give us more room for the cab. I'm gonna put some caps and plugs on those hoses right there so that they don't dribble out, and we'll move on to lifting the cab up. Now that we got the boom swung into place, we have to get the cab tilted up. There's a couple of steps to do that. First one being, we gotta pull this front panel off because otherwise it hits right here when the cab pivots forward and it'll actually bend and wreck this one. So there's 2 bolts, 13 mil head on it. I use a ratchet wrench. You can use a little impact, a socket, whatever you have to undo them. Put this panel somewhere safe so that you don't damage it with the 2 bolts so you don't lose them. Now, when we tilt this cab forwards, this glass will come in contact with these hoses if we don't remove it. So I'm gonna lift the front windshield, I'm gonna remove the lower glass. It's always a good idea to put the safety catch on, just so this glass doesn't come sliding forwards and smash down. It can break the glass. If you're in the way, it can hit you. Now this piece of glass, sometimes they're a little bit stuck. You have to give them a wiggle. There's no latches or anything. They pull straight up. Again, put it somewhere safe so nothing can bump it or hit it and break it. Now that we have the glass out, we're going to need to remove 3 bolts in the back. In this machine, we've taken the seat out because it was underwater. Seat was soaking wet. Didn't want it to get damaged or ruined or start growing mold or mushrooms, so we pulled it out, got it into a dry, heated place, and we're drying the seat out right now. Now in the back of the cab, there's 3 bolts. They use a 19 mil socket or wrench to remove. There's a total of 5 bolts in the back of this cab. There is a decal here in the corner. It shows you which 3 bolts to remove with the wrench. So it's the 3 bolts without the red cap. Sometimes when the machine gets a bit older, these red caps go missing. So that decal will let you know which 3 to undo. Now that those 3 bolts out, we'll put them somewhere safe as well. Not in the cab, because as you tilt the cab up, they'll roll out. The boom in this case isn't quite down far enough, so what I have to do is I got to lift this thumb up. We're going to do the same setup as we did on the swing cylinder, and then we're going to have to lower this boom. Again, we're going to do the same thing. So first we'll get this thumb up high enough out of our way. These 2 hoses here are what we're going to undo, put them into a bucket. We can lift this thumb by hand. We'll put the hoses back on, and hopefully it should stay where we leave it up top. So crack both hoses here. We know the thumb is down as far as it can be, so there's no pressure in these hoses. If this thumb was partially up, not all the way down, if you undo these hoses, you'll have a hydraulic oil mess. The thumb will want to go down. Whenever you're undoing hoses on cylinders, you have to make sure they're not pressurized on one side. So I just put them in a bucket like this, and we should be able to lift this thumb up. As you can see, we have oil coming out. Okay, now that it's all the way up, you have to hold it up or gravity will want to pull it back down. I'm going to reattach both hoses. Now, if we let this go, hopefully it doesn't sag down too far. If it comes down a little bit, that's okay. See how far down it goes. The only reason it's going down is because we've introduced air into this cylinder, and the weight of the thumb is compressing the air. So as you can see, it's definitely high enough for us, and because I know that there's air in the cylinder, if the thumb does happen to hit the ground when we lower the boom, it'll just push up again. Next step is to lower this boom. So what I've done is I've taken my service truck and I've connected the crane to the boom, and what you want to do is lift up the crane until it takes all the weight off of the boom, because if you undo them while the weight is on it, then you're going to have a hydraulic oil mess. You could injure yourself. The boom is just going to come down by itself. So again, we're going to do the same thing. We've got two hoses here. They come around here and they attach right here. So we can do the identical thing. Once the weight is off the boom with the crane, we can safely undo these without any injury. Cut a couple of zap straps here. Now that we have everything unbolted, glass out of the way, panels out of the way, there's a couple of ways you can lift these cabs. One is a lifting device, i.e. a crane, an overhead crane, a mobile crane, hook up another excavator to it. The other way, which you can do as well, there's a special jack that you can buy from the dealer. It mounts to where this black pad is here. That's a paint protector, and it goes up inside of here, and it's made to manually jack the cab up. In this case, I'm not going to use that. First of all, I don't have one because I have a crane. I've never bothered to buy one. So I've hooked my crane up to the lifting eye on the back of the cab, and we're going to lift the cab and we're going to tilt it forwards. Now, while you're doing this, you don't want to put your hands or any parts of your body or anybody else's under the cab until we have the safety device in once it's lifted. So I'll lift it up now. Now, as you can see here, I removed the glass, but you can see the hoses right now would be starting to push up against the glass. And if we would have left the glass in there, the glass would be broken if we went much further than this. So I always make sure that the hoses are coming inside the cab nicely. They're not getting bound up, they're not getting damaged or kinked in any way. Now you can see, if you get a shot in here, you can really see how far the hoses are in the cab. If there was glass there, it would have broken for sure. Now over here, the cab is lifted up. There's a safety bar right here. A lot of times if it's pushed back, you can't lift it up, or pushed forwards, I should say. So pull it back, lift it up, and it has to sit in this little pocket. Okay, now you can let the cab back down so it sits in there, or you can keep your crane on there and use this as a safety so that it'll catch it. In this case, we're gonna lower it. Now I know that this cab cannot come down. I can safely go in here with myself, my body, my head, my arms, know that nothing can fall and I can't hurt or kill myself. Now that we have the cab up, the next thing to do is get the water out of the cylinders of the engine so that we can safely turn this over. You do not want to turn this engine over right now with a starter or anything, because water does not compress like air. You will do internal catastrophic damage to the engine. You'll bend connecting rods, do much more damage than that, and you're basically ruining the engine completely. So what we're going to do is we're going to pull the fuel injectors out, and then we're going to roll this engine over by hand and get as much water out as we can, and then we can start using the starter and so on and so forth.
In what situations would you need to lift the cab?
So there's multiple reasons you might want to lift the cab. You know, most of the reasons are heavy-duty mechanics, techs, the guys that do this for a living. If you're going to attempt to lift the cab yourself, the reasons would be if you want to change your starter's on the inside of the machine here and you can't access it unless you lift the cab. You also have your alternator here if you need to replace your alternator or test it. You want to lift your cab to get at that because there's no other way. You also have your valve bank under here, lots of hoses. If you have blown hoses or leaks, you can get in here to fix those. Your swing transmission, which is the device that swings your machine around, is in here if you need to access it to do any work on it. And now that we have the cab tilted up and I can see the top of the engine, I see that this Yanmar engine in a 35G has glow plugs where previous models had a grid heater. So I don't need to remove the injectors. We can remove the glow plugs. To do so, I'm going to have to remove the fuel lines because they're in the way. So we'll remove the fuel lines, then we can get deeper in and start to get at the glow plugs. So a 17 mil wrench to crack the fuel lines off. There's one going to each injector. These are the 3 fuel lines on the injectors here. 1, 2, 3 that we'll remove to remove the fuel lines. This is your crankcase breather vent tube. It has to be pulled off to be able to pull the fuel lines off. And you have glow plugs. 1, down deep in here is 2, and then right in here is 3. I don't know if you can see there or not. They're an 8mm nut to pull the nuts off, and then they're a 12mm to pull the glow plug out. Your fuel lines are 17mm wrench to crack and unloosen your fuel lines on both ends.
Help support this channel by subscribing below and hitting that bell icon.
We got them off the injectors. We have to go onto this side and get them off of the injection pump. So these are the 3 fuel lines here. 1, 2, 3 on the injection pump. This is your injection pump. Our crankcase vent tube is blocking us a little bit, so we'll pop the one side off here, remove the clamp, pull it off, and now we can pull these lines out, pull these coolant lines out of the way for the EGR. Now we can wiggle these out. We're going to want to wrap them up in a rag so that we keep them clean. Now that we can see in here, we can see the glow plugs, and there's a glow plug rail. So what that is, there's a small metal flat bar that goes from one glow plug to the other, and that's so they attach a wire and that'll carry the power to each glow plug. So we'll remove that first. Looks like an 8mm socket. A little bit of paint on the studs. The wire is on the last cylinder here, the 3rd cylinder. We'll pop the wire off. Now we can remove that fuel rail. It looks like it's slotted. So loosen the glow plug nuts off. We remove the power rail here. I'll put that off to the side. We still have to get these nuts off so we can get the socket all the way down onto the glow plug further down. A little bit of paint on this one. Drop the nut in there, so I'm just going to grab a pick to pull the nut back out. Now we have to crack the glow plugs loose. Looks like a 12mm. Sometimes these can be a bit tighter for a 1/4-inch ratchet. We'll see. Pretty sure there's no water in that hole. I don't see any rust on the glow plug. This glow plug looks dry as well. Now this one might be a little bit more difficult to get through because we have the EGR exhaust tube here. Might be tough to get on. Hopefully we can get it out, and we are able to get it out. This one's actually dry as well. We might have gotten lucky and not gotten any water in the engine at all, but either way we have to spin it over by hand now to see if any water comes out. So what we're going to do is we're going to find the socket that goes on the front pulley of the alternator, and with the glow plugs out there's no compression, so it should be fairly easy to turn this engine over. So that's the first step. Okay, so now we've got the ratchet. It's a 22mm on the alternator. I'm going to try and spin the engine over by hand. The belt is slipping, so I'm going to help it out by pushing on the fan. Now what we're doing is seeing if we want to spin this engine over a couple of times, see any water that comes out of the engine or anything like that. Okay, we've definitely spun this engine over a few times and no water has come out. I'm very surprised seeing how much water was in the engine oil and the fuel tank and the hydraulic tank. So that's a good sign. That's a really good sign. No water in there. Normally what you would see is water's going to start pumping out of all 3 of those holes. You want to continue turning the engine over by hand until no more water comes out of those holes. Then what we do is we start turning it over with the key or the starter. You don't want to start doing that because the water can't come out of the holes fast enough with how fast the starter turns it over. You'll end up bending a connecting rod. So now that we know no water's coming out with that, I still want to turn it over with the starter to be 100% sure. You know, after you do it by hand, there's still water in the hole. If you do it with the starter, it starts spinning it faster and gets the most amount of water out. You can't get any more water out than that. So the next step is to put the battery in this thing. Right now there's no battery. Then we're gonna turn it over with the starter. Then we can put this machine back together and hopefully be able to start it up. Next, we're gonna put the battery in, give this machine some power, see if we can get the engine to turn over with the key so that we can make sure that there's no water in the cylinders. You always want to hook up the power first and then the ground when you're hooking batteries up. The reason for that is everything here is metal. If the ground is hooked up, that means this all becomes ground. And if you're tightening up your positive terminal and you touch your air conditioning condenser or your oil cooler, it'll arc, it'll create a hole, it's dangerous. So always power first on all vehicles, everything. I've already cleaned the terminals and the battery posts, so we know we have a good connection. Put the protective cover back on. Now we can hook up the ground. You will see a little spark. You might not see it on camera, but you should hear it or see it. That's normal. In this case, I didn't. I don't know the condition of the computers and everything in this machine because it was submerged in water. So right now, we're not 100% sure on if it's going to work or not. Now the battery is in, it's not mounted 100%. I don't know where the hold down rod is for right here. This piece we can put in. We'll leave it for now just because I don't know whether we have power or not at the moment. So next is, I'm gonna put the key in the ignition. Just turn the key on to on, not into start mode or anything like that, and see if we have any power on the dash, see if we have any power anywhere. Now that I've got the battery in and we've got power, I just turn the key onto on, the dash comes on, I can hear the electric fuel pump ticking away, which means I've got power there. If I go and turn this engine over with the key right now, well, of course the machine doesn't know, hey, we've got fuel lines off, so I don't want any fuel coming out of the injector fittings where the fuel lines would go on. So there's a plug right here, simply unplug it. And what that does is it doesn't allow fuel to go through the injection pump, so no fuel will be pumping out of these fuel fittings. Now what we're going to do is we're going to just bump it over a couple of times, on off with the key, just in case there is water in there, because right now I'm still flabbergasted no water came out. And then after we do that a few times, we can start to turn it over more, and then we can actually hold the starter over and let it just sit there and turn over. And if any water's in those holes, it's going to push them out the glow plug holes and get it free and clear of water so we can put this thing back together and try and start it. It definitely looks like we've got some water out of there. And I'm gonna jump up top. I'm gonna put some glow plugs back in and put the power rail back on and continue on. We're gonna try and start it. To support this channel, can you please like, subscribe, and comment?
Need parts for your machine? Be sure to visit FortisHD.com. To easily and quickly book a mechanic, visit TechomoHD.com. Thanks for all the support so far, especially on this service call series. We love hearing feedback from the community, and if there's anything you'd like to see, be sure to let us know in the comments.